high in the Tibetan mountains. It has taken several days on our initial ascent to the first camp. As we climb ever higher into the abyss, I can't help but feeling as if we will never reach our destination. However, no matter what, we must press on if we are to uncover the secrets of ancient levitation. The monks here are said to possess great power and the ability to levitate themselves and their objects in a manner that is quite irregular. But I doubt the extent of which will be on display for us if we do indeed reach the temple. But only time will tell, as the frozen winds of Everest work their way into our bones, slowing each step to an agonizing crawl. We must be getting close. We just have to be. On our final day of the climb, we had a stroke of luck with the weather, and we were able to make our final push to reach our destination. As we rounded a large section of boulders, I could feel a vibration beneath my feet. And then, good God, man! I could not believe my own eyes as a massive stone block floated itself above my head high in the air and rested on a cliff ledge well above the temple. As we moved along a perfectly aligned pathway towards the temple gate, we could see 20 monks with large horns positioned in a strange way, facing a distant rock face. Behind them were another section of drummers. I had found the source of the vibrations. Somehow, these men have discovered the secrets of ancient levitation. Anonymous Explorer, 1899. The ancient wisdom of Tibetan monks is still on display to this very day, but it is only a small piece along the journey of understanding the amazing feats of ancient engineering in our world. Whether it be the Great Pyramid of Giza, the enigma of the basalt heads of the ancient Olmec in Central America, or the Easter Island heads of Rapa Nui, we have only begun to scratch the surface of understanding our ancient past. However, there have been some who throughout history have appeared to unlock some of these very secrets. One such man is the focus for tonight's show. A small, strange, yet kind individual who all alone, without modern machines, was able to quarry and erect over 1,000 tons of limestone into something incredible. Quote, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids and have found out how the Egyptians and ancient builders in Peru, Yucatan, and Asia, with only primitive tools, raised and set in place blocks of stone weighing many tons." Edward Leedskalnin, 1940. Join us tonight on Into the Portal as we attempt to unearth the secrets of ancient levitation, the Earth's magnetic grid, and the enigma that is the legendary Rock Gate Park, better known today as Coral Castle.
So the legend of Ed Leedskalnin goes. He claimed to know the secrets of the Egyptians and had harnessed a form of anti-gravity magnetism to lift immense blocks of limestone weighing up to 30 tons. Ed had only received a formal education up to grade 4 and had come from a poor Latvian family. However, despite this lack of education, Ed was a sponge that soaked up everything around him. He learned the family trade of stone cutting, and by the time he reached adulthood, he was an expert in everything from tombstone cutting to working on the finest stone castles in Latvia. After being left at the altar by Agnes Scuffs, his sweet 16, Ed decided to move to the US from Latvia.
Ed wandered North America for a while, ending up in Cranbrook, British Columbia, for a time before heading back to Spokane area to work in the lumber trade, where he most likely contracted tuberculosis that would plague him for the rest of his life. In the winter of 1922-23, Ed purchased 2 acres of undeveloped land in Florida City and began a 20-year construction project known today as Coral Castle, although Ed never called it that.
The construction was done entirely in secret and appeared to be operated by one simple hand crank attached to a magnetized flywheel. This intriguing apparatus was accompanied by other strange elements: a tripod with a mysterious box on top with levers and pulleys extending downward into a pit where Ed would quarry his limestone blocks, and neighbors reported singing coming from the property during times Ed was at work.
However, Ed's most amazing feat came in the 1930s when he decided to move his beloved Coral Castle to a new, more private location. Ed hired a driver to help him move the blocks to the new location and insisted on complete privacy, always moving the blocks by himself. In one instance, the driver came back early unexpectedly to find all the blocks loaded within a mere half hour.
The mystery grows deeper, as Ed always used a secret code for his notes and many works of writing, none of which have been successfully deciphered. Many believe Ed's riddles contain esoteric secrets from the past that we have since forgotten, while others ridicule the legend and scoff at the idea of a feeble man accomplishing the construction of his Magnum Opus, Rock Gate. But the physical evidence remains overwhelming, and the legacy of Ed and his beloved Sweet 16 remains alive in the minds of those willing to explore the impossible and unravel the cryptic riddles of a most peculiar Latvian man. Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with
Yes, we are indeed.
Episode 11.
Episode 11, coming
Yep.
at you guys. And
Rock
it's
Gate.
Rock Gate. Yeah.
Or better known as Coral Castle.
Yes.
We wanted to stick to Ed's original name of the place, though.
That's
just
right.
in his honor.
Yeah. So, I mean, the focus of the episode is on this guy, Ed, and the construction of this just very strange place.
Very strange.
And like you said, is now better known as Coral Castle.
Very
but
impressive.
It's
Still
extremely impressive.
Exactly. It's kind of become a fixture, a Florida fixture, one of the sideshow routes or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean,
attractions.
it was a part of. I mean, that's one of the things that people speculate on is why exactly was it built there? Why did Ed go build it there? Some say because he had tuberculosis, was going for warmer weather. Others say it's because the Earth's magnetic grid, there's a good spot that he found there.
Yeah, so I guess we just need to cover a little bit more detail as opposed to, diving right into all the theories. We have some special guests with us tonight.
We do.
A special interview with the Mad Scientist hosts, or Mad Scientist podcast, I should say.
Yeah, Chris and Marie.
Chris and Marie.
Yeah, so we're stoked on that.
Yeah.
But we wanted to give a little more tidbits on Ed because his background's really interesting.
Exactly. Yes.
So what do you got?
Well, he was born in Latvia, January 12th, 1887. He was an immigrant. He did migrate to the U.S. When he was about 23.
Yeah.
Very interesting man, though. He came from a family of stone cutters, as we mentioned in our introduction, our little bio on him.
Which could have obviously played a role in his ability to create such a impressive work, but maybe not the whole piece of the pie, so to speak. There had to have been something else.
Well, and we'll get into that. So, anyways, what drew you into this story? Let's cover that, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I didn't actually know about Coral Castle or Rock Gate until I started looking into just the idea of like sonic levitation in general. And then that's when people, I mean, there's a million articles out there on
sonic levitation.
Yeah, right, specifically. So like with sound.
Okay.
But then you come up with all kinds of stuff and a lot of it's very, out there theories on like the pyramids and levitation and stuff like that. But then it just sort of, I just stumbled upon Coral Castle, and then we listened to and were inspired by the Astonishing Legends episode on Ed, and just the idea that this guy weighed 100 pounds, he had tuberculosis, he was malnourished by all accounts, and
very tiny man. He was about 5'3".
He was tiny,
maybe 5'5" tops. He did always overestimate his height when he had to list, like there's paperwork where he's enlisting, and anyways, he liked to exaggerate. but
it's just interesting because it's like Yeah, I believe in the idea that there are simple physics, applications of simple physics that have been lost, and it's not necessarily all magical. But the fact that this guy was so tiny and 1,000 tons of
Even
limestone.
just the photos, right? You see the photos of him and his tripod and him at work, and he's literally like a tenth of the size of this apparatus that he supposedly constructed single-handedly and operates single-handedly.
And did so at nighttime, right?
All at night.
Like we mentioned, and so that people wouldn't see him. And the question is whether or not he just did that because he's an eccentric, or was he really wanting to keep something secret?
Some
because,
sort of esoteric knowledge or something.
Maybe he didn't want it to fall in the wrong hands or whatever, maybe, I don't know.
Or maybe he was slightly jaded and he didn't want to share it with the world. That's the theory.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, that's kind of interesting, though. So, let's dive into the whole... There's a bunch of different theories, and a lot of them involve similar ideas, but different expressions, I would say, and some of them are definitely more outlandish.
Yes.
And I guess the most basic is the one that you've already mentioned, simple physics. He's just using knowledge that is there for us. We all know it. We just choose not to use it because we have machines.
Right.
And because the Industrial Revolution happened.
Yeah,
and
we headed down a path that was going a different direction and acquired more knowledge along that path, which doesn't necessarily mean that ancient knowledge is lost, but it's just, it's there in the peripheral vision of culture, so to
not
speak.
in the mainstream,
yeah,
by any means.
So... But the question is whether or not Ed tapped into that. Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating to me.
So your topic of interest is the sonic levitation. So let's dive into that one first.
Sure. So that was, the reason we did the intro, chose to do the intro we did with the reenactment of the ascent of Everest in Tibet was because one of the articles we stumbled across early on in researching this show
is it Everest? It's not Everest. Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In Tibet.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. I think so. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, like in general, though, Buddhist monks being able to, through deep meditation individually, achieve personal levitation, so actually be able to levitate themselves, but then also, kind of more significantly for this episode, large groups of them using basically these massive didgeridoo looking monk horns and drums in a certain orientation and formation and shape to levitate objects. And there are accounts of this happening, and they are peer-reviewed accounts. So
peer-reviewed.
Yes.
Because I have some sources that are definitely not peer-reviewed.
Let's hear that first.
Okay. We're just gonna get into the nonsense right off. Well, okay. I did come across this book called Anti-Gravity and the World Grid.
Okay.
And it's by two individuals, one Bruce Cathy, and edited by David A. Childress. I will get into the reputations of those two individuals in a second here, but yeah, so they had a chapter in this book, Anti-Gravity in the World Grid, called Diamagnetic Gravity Vortices, and they discuss the role of ley lines and the Earth grid as a geometrical flow of like gravity energy in the structure of the Earth itself. That's a quote from the book. Okay. So, anyways, they reference this German publication sourced from this Swedish dude. He was a civil engineer called Henry Jelson. Kjell Jelson. Anyways, it's KJ.
Yeah, that's who's mentioned in the article I have here as well.
Interesting. Okay, so multiple references to the same guy, where he basically had a friend, Dr. Jarl.
Dr. Jarl.
Dr. Jarl. Okay. Who went into the high mountains of Tibet and basically came up with this amazing story of these stones being levitated in an arc-type pattern. Like it's like almost like described as a third of a circle where they're standing. They are standing in a third of the circle themselves. Yeah. And then they're basically concentrating the energy into that exact point where the stone's located. Right. Right. And then what happens is what they describe. Okay, this is a quote here. During the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. Then as the speed of the drumming and the noise increased, the big stone block started to rock and sway, and suddenly it took off into the air with an increasing speed in the direction of the platform in front of the cave hole, 250 meters high. Wow. After 3 minutes of ascent, it landed on the platform. Continuously, they brought new blocks to the meadow, and the monks, using this method, transported 5 or 6 blocks per hour on a parabolic flight track approximately 500 meters long and 250 meters high.
Crazy.
And then they say here is, from time to time, a stone split, and the monks moved the split stones away. Quite an unbelievable task. End quote. So, very interesting, the power of that sound. Obviously, if there was... some sort of fracture in the rock, that it could definitely be exploited and penetrated and burst the rock.
Right.
That's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
What was yours? You had a peer-reviewed account?
Okay. Well, it's basically going over the same account from this Dr. Jarl.
Okay.
But it's from Humboldt State University, and it's essentially going over the same things that you just mentioned. It's a bunch of diagrams of the account, and you know what? There actually isn't an author on this one.
Really?
Believe it or not, if I dug deeper.
It's not a Bruce Cathy or David Childress?
No, it doesn't seem to be. But, nevertheless, it's essentially saying that the like how specific the account was and the diagrams that he drew to go along with it, there was nothing preceding this that would indicate that he would be making it up.
Same Dr. Jarl, right?
Yes, and the level of detail for he was there for a purpose. It didn't seem like he was making it up, is what this article is suggesting, and I tend to agree.
Yeah, I actually read too that he sort of had written that when he went to Tibet, he kind of went with the presupposition that he was going to be under some sort of mass hysteria, some sort of like delusion of everyone. So he was kind of going into it being very skeptical and this definitely wasn't a peer-reviewed source, but I saw another little bit that he, because of his incredulity, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yes, you are.
He filmed it. He filmed it on 2 occasions. And his film was apparently confiscated and deemed classified by this British society. That it was like a British archaeological society that he was working with. And
Isn't that just typical?
I know, right? So it did sound very conspiratorial, and I was like, really though? Okay, like.
It's tough to say one way or the other.
I mean, really is.
I really want to. I'm leaning in the direction of belief with this account, and the fact that it has been.
You're leaning with it. Hey?
I'm leaning with it. But that's So the Tibetan monks, and that's still something on display today.
Okay.
It's not on display like a tourist attraction, but I'm of the mind. We've got a friend who's in Tibet right now.
Yes.
And he's not specifically going there to find ancient levitation.
No.
But I told him to ask around. And
see what he comes up with.
So we'll see what Josh can come up with there.
Yeah. Put you on the spot, buddy.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating, though. This idea that you can, like, manipulate matter in such a way to create some sort of anti-gravity field.
Right. And I guess the question of this is whether or not something similar was, whether or not Ed knew of something similar, some similar technique.
Because he was all about the magnets.
He was all about the magnets, but this is where the sound aspect comes into it. Does the orientation, say for like the levitation of the monks, does their certain orientation of horns and drums and their location, where they're actually doing this, is the sound just a part of the creation of energy, right? Like, is the sound just like
the
one
waves,
way
it's the energy waves,
right? And are those waves oriented in such a way to like change, like the matter in the air, basically, like particles? So like what we're getting into with Ed is particles are magnets.
Well, okay,
right?
And just before we get into that, that has been proved, right? Like sound waves, we hear sound, but it's creating energy waves, and we watched that YouTube video, "The Smarter Every Day," which is in our sources. Yeah. And that demonstrated, it showed the standing wave that can be created by 2 identical sound waves colliding in such a way that they create this pocket where you can levitate, like say, like it's a very small pocket, mind you, so they were levitating droplets of water. Right. And they had them all in a string. It's amazing. And I was like, this is magic. It's crazy.
Well, it looks like that, right?
It's crazy.
But that's anyways, on such a small scale, but it does work.
And, like the model of that, when you see it, because they illuminate it with, I can't remember if it's dry ice or just some sort of smoke, so you can kind of like see the patterns of the air. but it definitely reminded me of Ed's drawings of the double helical magnetic field model thing.
Right, which we'll touch on in our theory section at the end, because he wrote a couple of books, and we're going to discuss those in a little bit with Chris and Marie.
With our experts.
But we'll touch on that again at the end, because it's really interesting. And his Sweet 16 and all that stuff, because he supposedly built this castle for his Sweet 16.
Right.
And we're just about ready to get into this interview with these guys. But I guess there was a couple other things that we should mention.
There
about
was.
Ed.
And even just on the note that we're on right now with the idea of sound and magnets.
Yeah.
I came across this guy, this Michael Tellinger guy. And I'm not saying he's like, he had some pretty outlandish ideas. And he went on a tour called Hidden Origins in 2017.
He's kind of a crackpot.
He's a South African flat earther, among other things.
Yeah.
He's kind of a nonsense purveyor.
Yes, he is.
And he basically said that everything is sound and magnetism, that sound creates magnetic fields.
Interesting.
And then he did use the example of that UCLA video,
right?
Which we'll touch on in greater detail with Chris, because he'll be able to explain a lot better.
Yeah, exactly.
But very interesting, though.
His sources aren't credible, but they're a launch point because other people talk about the same stuff, and including Ed.
Exactly. So he did create this connection between sound and magnetism.
Right.
And I didn't even really end up watching the whole thing because it was so ridiculous. But the premises he started off with from UCLA were quite interesting. So on that note,
Well, I did have one other thing to say about Ed before we jump into the interview.
Of course.
I mean, because I think we got it. We got to let people know a tiny bit about. I mean, we already just gave the brief overview how he started in Latvia doing his thing, stonecutter background, comes to America.
Yeah.
Right. But he obviously he was in Canada for a little bit, and then he traveled through down the Pacific West Coast, working in logging, working in mining. Did his work in these industries add to his ability to achieve what he did in terms of making tripods and leveraging crazy things? So that was one thing. But before he even left Europe, I think it's important to mention that Ed was not just a tradesman working away.
No.
He was a revolutionary against the Tsar Nicholas II, because it was obviously under the dominion of Russia and Latvia. And he killed a couple of cops. His family was killed by revolutionary opposition.
He was HC hardcore.
He was hardcore. He ended up going to the UK for a little bit. It was a part of an anarchist movement in the UK. And then he comes over to North America, and he's just growing vegetables, and he's this feeble little nice guy.
But and that obviously can explain a lot of maybe his attitudes and his reservations for maybe why he didn't.
Possibly.
He was speaking in these riddles that you read.
Possibly.
It is quite interesting to think that could be an underlying motive for why he wouldn't share these amazing secrets that he potentially could have had.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, if you think about it, he actually was almost trying to put out his ideas, right? Because he was publishing these pamphlets, putting these advertisements out, and trying, you know what I mean?
They just happen to be obscure.
Yeah,
but
very.
We'll touch on that. Anyway, I think it's about time.
Well, yeah.
Oh, are you ready? Got one more thing? I'm just excited. I'm just getting excited.
I know. I guess, that really does. Yeah, we'll touch on, we'll have our own conclusions after the interview, and I guess we'll jump straight to it then.
All right, guys. So
without further ado.
Yeah, without further ado, here are the notorious Chris and Marie from Mad Scientist Podcast. Well, hello, you guys. Welcome to the show.
Glad to have you.
So thanks so much for being on.
Thank you.
So you guys are the experts on pretty much everything that we're going to get into for this episode. So,
which is why we have you here.
Experts is a strong word
for what we are. That's an extreme. That's
putting a lot of pressure on us, guys. I don't know. I don't know how comfortable I am with that.
You're familiar then. How about that? Very familiar.
All right, that's fine.
You've done some research into this before.
Yeah.
So we wanted to pick your brains.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I figured, best spot to kick it off is, let's get your guys' take on Ed and on Coral Castle. Just, your elevator pitch take on Coral Castle.
So I think Ed is the kind of guy for whom lifelike female dolls were made.
Interesting.
Right?
That's cold.
Do you guys know what I mean? They sell them, they're like $8,000 or something. They're crazy.
Yeah, I get
super
that.
detailed.
Yep.
The more you read,
or
the
like
more...
I could see that.
Yeah, or like the kind of person who kind of develops their own language and then only talks in that language to like himself. Right? Like kind of like if he had chosen a different path in life, I think he could have been as imaginative as, say, like J.R.R. Tolkien, where it's like you develop so much of your own internal world, your own internal thought process and ideas and philosophies and whatever, that then you just kind of unleash them on the world, and like out of nowhere, suddenly it's like, oh my God, that's wild that this person has been thinking about all this stuff for so long.
Yeah.
The only difference is that he thought his internal world was real in some ways, right? So it's like he obsessed about this idea and these processes and stuff, and they are legitimately cool. But I think anytime you have like an eccentric like that who just obsesses about one thing for so long, even if the thing they obsess about is something like, most of the time the people that obsess about this stuff, it's something mundane, right? It's like, you know, they're super into cars or like old gas cans or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure.
With him, he was obsessed with kind of this, these physics, what appear to be tricks, but are really just simple applications of physics in ways that we don't have to do anymore because we have, you know, machines and things that can do the heavy lifting for us, you know. So that's kind of my take. Like, I think it's unfortunate that in my mind, it is weird and unfortunate that he decided to focus his attention on this one random thing as opposed to, like, I don't know, solving, like, you know, the energy problem.
Yeah, like he obviously was onto something he could have focused on. Yeah.
And he was obviously very smart. Like, he was obviously, I think, so I don't know if he was onto something with what he was doing. I think he was smart. I think he was good with physics. I think he had clearly he had like a mechanical mindset and kind of almost a what's the word? Almost like a talent for mechanics in some way.
Sure.
But and I wish that he had applied that in a different way than just like making this big weird thing.
Right.
Dude,
Okay, Maria, I want to hear you.
Take,
yeah,
I gotta take some slight umbrage with Dr. Cogswell's hypothesis. I think that one, I think it's interesting that he did it in Florida, right? So he did it sort of what is now in the theme park.
Oh, okay.
You know, the biggest name of theme parks probably in America is Florida. And he did put his energy towards something that was really weird, but it was also really lasting. You know, so it's not just like it's this weird external, you know, obsession that's not easily replicated today by the same means. And that's sort of why I think it's interesting, because it's like you can go to Universal and go see, you know, Harry Potter, or you can go to Disney World, but you know, there's this park that's basically just a bunch of rocks.
Yeah,
you know?
it doesn't sound super exciting offhand, but it actually is. It's just so cool though.
Yeah,
but it's still drawing them in. There's still this mystery and sort of this strangeness around it that I think is sort of as interesting as if he did do something more external for the world, because you can argue that he kind of in some ways did.
I was gonna say, if we look at it as a work of art, I completely agree with you, right? Like, I think he did, and I think you should consider Coral Castle a monumental achievement of kind of human artistry and like the ability of an individual person to, like, have you guys watched any of those? So I'm a super weird with what I watch on YouTube. But if you guys ever watched those videos, it's called, I can't remember what the guy's channel is named totally, but it's something like Stonehenge technology or something, right?
Oh, okay.
And this guy videotapes himself building, like, he starts with just his hands and a pair of khaki shorts.
Yeah.
And he ends up building, like, he builds himself a hut out of clay that has a working furnace, and he's able to
I've
actually
seen
smelt
that guy.
iron.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
heard of
smelts.
that.
He gets so far that he's like smelting iron, and then he's like, "Well, I'm going
Totally.
to start over again."
Oh,
right?
primitive technology.
Primitive technology. That is
Yeah.
the name of the video.
Just
Yeah,
Googled
those
it.
are the name of the series. He's amazing, and in the same way, like I wish that there was some sort of like video or chronology or some kind of instructional guide that this guy left that Ed left behind that would be like, well, this is what I did, this is how I did it, whatever.
Right.
And the part of it though that I really love is I love the fact like the Coral Castle proves that one person with enough time and energy dedicated to it can build a monolithic stone structure by themselves, right? Like, the Coral Castle should, if anything, completely disprove and completely blow out of the water every stupid ancient alien hypothesis out there, right?
Hey, there's a new season coming out, man.
Of course there is, because Giorgio got to get them checks.
Oh yeah.
It's like this
Some of that
one
ancient alien money.
this one dude moves to Florida with like not a lot of money. He moves over here from Latvia. He builds this ginormous structure over his lifetime, and still people are like, how did he do this thing? Well, if he was able to do that, then like 10,000 ancient Egyptians definitely built the pyramids.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
No, for
Like,
sure.
of course they fucking did.
Yeah.
But instead what happened is the ancient alien folks flipped it around and are instead like, no, well, this guy must have had alien help too.
Right.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's just
It's
batshit
craziness.
crazy. No, totally.
It's insanity.
But I
Oh
think
my
too,
God.
Like if you put it, if you set aside the idea of ancient aliens just for a moment, which I know it's hard, but
You can never do
if
that.
you look
Marie.
at him, if you look at sort of like him and his singularity of focus and the length of time that he took to build versus a theme park, right? Which was again sort of this singular notion from some person who again like Disney himself but had it writ large into sort of propagating almost into this hive mentality to build this huge structure and this huge enterprise. To me, it's like the difference between the two people. I'm not, I am drawing a comparison, but it's just an interesting, again, it's this, because of proximity, it's sort of this interesting comparison between the two. This one guy who is like, again, he's like maybe 98 pounds soaking wet.
Yeah.
Took all this time and sort of this religious fervor around this one thing.
Yeah.
And then you've got Disney, who had a lot of passion and a lot of drive as well, who ended up doing something relatively similar, but it just became something so completely different.
Yeah,
Well, it's
that's
kind
an
of-
interesting
but there's
comparison.
That is actually two men with
there's
visions.
no mythos. Yeah, but there's and the weird thing is it's like so you got Ed, and Ed's got all of this sort of mystery and all this sort of like unknown, but then you have Disney, which is the opposite. It's sort of the simulacrum of unknown.
Yeah,
Right? There's nothing
yeah.
that's unknown about Disney.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Disney is all artifice. It's all fake.
Totally.
It's
Yeah.
there is nothing about Disney that has any true like mystique or haunting.
No, there's no mystery
So,
there.
right?
Right.
Well, what I think is interesting actually is kind of what you were like, because he originally wanted it to become a theme park, right? Like he not a theme park per se, like he didn't build rides or anything out of these stones, but like he
That
had
would have been dope.
he had a plan. Like he thought he charged people. What was it, like $1? It was like 30 cents, and then he changed it to $1 because of inflation in like the 90s or something ridiculous.
Yeah, it
like,
started off at like 10
Well,
cents or something.
Originally,
like
he didn't charge. Originally, and then
Right,
his
right,
neighbors
right.
were the
Right,
ones that
right.
suggested that he monetize it.
that. Because he
Yeah.
literally wasn't even like buying food for himself. So they were like, hey, you should
Yeah.
probably charge 10 cents and buy yourself an apple.
Right,
every
at least
once in
have
a while.
something.
It's your
What's-
life's work. You might as well benefit from it
Yeah.
monetarily in some way or form.
What I think is really interesting is actually the fact that I haven't gone back and checked this actually because I didn't think we would talk about Disney in this episode, but I was
Gotcha.
super into Disney, like his like life and biography
Oh,
and whatever.
yeah.
And I went to we went to Disney World for like a in Florida for a school trip, and me as like a huge nerd ended up reading this biography of Disney that I bought in Disney World, right? like for like a good portion of the trip. But anyways, I had read.
I don't want to see a parade. I don't want to go on Magic Mountain. I'm going to sit here and read this book.
But so in the book though, it mentions why they chose Florida, and it's because like not only is Florida, like they had a bunch of other places where they thought they were originally going to build it, and Florida won out because the land was dirt cheap because it's all on swamp.
Yeah.
And so nobody wanted to build on it. So it's kind of like the fact that all these big projects ended up in Florida, to me, it's kind of like, well, it's because you're giving land away, basically.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like, all you got to do, you need a bucket and a way to keep the gators out, and then you're pretty much solid to build in Florida.
That was the interesting thing about
yeah.
Ed too, because it's like, I mean, the land was cheap at the time in the teens and moving into the 20s, even for farmland, and then he just wanted land that couldn't be farmed. So it was like, you could definitely have that.
And that was one of the reasons why he moved Coral Castle too, was because there was this flood of people buying up land and developing it, and he was getting crowded, was one of the reasons that I read.
Right.
So he decided he wanted to kind of scoot down further south,
I
was
guess.
it? Yeah. Something like
Actually,
that.
I have kind of
Hide his mythos more.
Yes.
People were
yeah, well, that's the thing.
invasive.
So I have two things to say quick. First off, to that last point that Marie just made, he also worked really hard to like make it he worked really, really hard to kind of hide what he was doing because I think he got a kick out of people being like, what are you doing? How'd you move that stone? Right.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Classic old man move
dummies.
there.
But
Gotta keep
but
the
actually
mystique up somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
the other question I wanted to ask was, so you guys are from Canada. Do you guys have a Florida equivalent in Canada? So Florida for the U.S. is like our weird state. It's like
Really?
every time you hear about a guy getting naked in an Arby's eating someone's face off, it's in Florida.
Really?
It's always Florida.
That's-
That's the hot
Yeah.
spot,
I
eh?
mean, not really.
Honestly,
Yes.
no. We're too spread out.
I'm trying to think. Like, what would...
I was thinking climate-wise, probably
know.
right here, but not for like weird stuff.
I don't... Yeah.
No, I'm talking like
Maybe the Great
they
Lakes.
find out.
Crazy place.
Well,
they
the Great
find out
Lakes
that
is known for
someone
having weird stuff, but not human weird stuff. It's like basically the
just
Bermuda
Ontario,
Triangle.
Great
the
Lakes
north.
area. There's some weird stuff that goes on there, but nothing as infamous as Florida, I don't think.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would
You
say
guys are
Florida's
due.
the state. Yeah, you guys are too. Got to work on that. You got to get Trudeau up on that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Taxes.
So just to clarify here, from what I understand, from what both of you guys have said, you're of the mind that this is achievable by one person over an extended period of time using simple physics.
Oh my goodness, 1,000,000%.
Okay. So
Because that's what
question,
happened.
my next question is,
Well, no, I'm just
do
like,
you
yeah, I
buy
would agree.
into the more unbelievable aspects, like that one anecdotal story where Ed, when he was in the midst of moving Coral Castle and he had that hired truck driver, and there was that one story where apparently, because he always asked the truck driver to leave and come back in the morning, and he would have everything loaded by then over the night. And so basically, there was that one account where the truck driver came back after only half an hour unexpectedly, and he came back to find the truck completely loaded. Do you think that's possible, or do you think that's just a wives' tale, or what's your take on that?
Okay. First off, I think it wasn't the truck that was loaded. It was probably the truck driver.
Oh,
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing.
There
I'm
you
just
go.
playing.
All right.
I don't know anything about that truck driver. I'm just playing, guys. What I would say is, again, this is all achievable with simple physics. Even if you don't think that Ed did it, a person could do it. There are YouTube videos that show people doing this. It is not. Again, the way that I would describe it is, it's like if you have ever had to move a fridge, right? Fridges weigh an immense amount, right? But
They're
you can
awkward.
still move them. You can still push them around just using basic physics where you lean them
Right.
around a central point.
Right,
And then
using
kind of offset
wedges
some of the
and-
weight.
Totally.
Yeah, right?
Totally.
But the time frame, though, that's what I'm going to push you on.
Amber...
Because it's half an hour, man, and it was
Yeah,
how many
I mean-
thousands of tons of limestone that he moved? Like,
I would say that it's probably a wives' tale, right? I would bet that maybe he came back in like an hour, maybe 2 hours, whatever.
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
And I would say that maybe a single stone got added, and then over time it became a whole thing where he's like, do we know how many stones were loaded onto these trucks at once? Because if it is, these stones are huge. It probably only one stone per pallet was able to be loaded, right?
Okay.
So I would not doubt that one stone could be moved in that time potentially, especially if it's almost already there, ready for loading, whatever. Like, you know what I mean? There's so many of these. It's the same way with, like, a lot of the times with abduction cases, you get the same thing where it's someone will say, you know, oh my God, I lost 3 hours of time. But then you find out, well, you were on a 6-hour journey and it took you 9 hours, right?
Right.
But there are all these places where you're like, well, here I was driving 10 miles per hour because I thought the alien was coming for me, you know, and here I stopped to look at the ship for a half an hour. And it's like, well, all these little stops start adding up to, you know what I mean? Like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and suddenly you're just asleep someplace for an hour, 15 minutes, whatever. It stops being so unbelievable, right? I mean, it's really easy for people to misremember, for people to actually displace time.
Sure.
I don't think we realize. Like, for instance, can either of you describe to me in detail the last time you drove home from work?
I can, because I just did it.
No, I can't.
Well, I'm saying, can you tell me how long were you on the highway for?
Oh, there's no highway.
No, I get what you're saying. Though.
But yeah, no, totally. Where you just do it
to the T. It's
exactly, and it's just almost like
Like how many cars did you see? What color were the cars?
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
like those details get filtered out over time, and like really quickly, you know. And so,
it's really easy to make some more of something than it really is, just to add to the mystery. Like, my big question is, once Ed was dead and the property was bought by the next owners, and they hired a PR guy to basically give it the look and the feel and the name Coral Castle, because Ed never called it that. So in a sense, could this mythology have been created by these individuals in the hopes of, you know, making this an attraction, and more people talk about it, more people come and add to the whole legend of it all, you know what I mean?
If I remember correctly, I think all that Ed said when people asked him, how did you build this, was he would say, I used the technology of the ancients.
Yep. He knew the secrets of the Egyptians, is what he said.
Knew the secrets, right, he knew the secrets of the Egyptians. Well, you know what? I mean, one of the biggest secrets of the Egyptians is how the hell did they move those big-ass stones?
Right.
Right, so it's kind of like, you know...
No.
Well, clearly with anti-gravity technology brought about by the Palladians, I mean, it's obvious to me. You know, like it is one of those big questions, but again, it's not an impossible task, right? And
I'm just as impressed. I'm just as, you know, mystified by the real world like ways of doing this as the ancient alien ideas of things.
Well, even
it is almost more amazing that a 100-pound old man was able to move these stones just using his brain, right, and a little bit of hard work. That is amazing. It is such a better, more compelling story than, you know, whatever, you know, some alien from some distant planet came down and was like, "Hey, want us to do this for you? We can give you the technology." Like it that is the main problem with the ancient alien thing generally. Not to get too like deep into the philosophy of this stuff with you guys here, but like the whole point, like the whole idea of the ancient alien hypothesis in some ways is that it takes away agency and culture and history from the ancient peoples that they are. Basically, at the core of the ancient alien hypothesis is this idea that there is no way that these people in the desert were able to think of technology that I can't think of today.
Yeah.
Right? That
totally
is at the core of this theory.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing here. We assume that this guy from Latvia, right? Like, we build up this story like this guy was from Latvia. He came over with no money, only had the shirt on his back. I know lots of dudes from Latvia who come over here with nothing that make themselves millionaires, right? Like, that is a story of so many immigrant families. And so to discount that story just because it doesn't fit into, like, you know, just because you, some dude with, you know, whatever, a stupid hat and a fanny pack who calls yourselves an ancient alien hypothesis, just because you can't think of how to move these stones doesn't mean someone smarter than you couldn't think of it.
No, totally. And you know what?
But
go ahead, Marie.
I was going to say, I agree with everything even down to the stupid hat and fanny pack that Chris is saying. And
it's all it takes to be an ancient alien hypothesis. It's a hat and a stupid fanny pack. That's all it takes.
That's it. That's their that's their research.
They come with a certificate.
I will say that, I think that he did encourage sort of this more mystical thinking about things, even with sort of the iconography that he put into the park itself.
Definitely.
So I think he, so to your point about like, well, could he have loaded that trailer? Well, again, without knowing sort of like the more data about it, like how big were the rocks, how big was the trailer, how long was the time, stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. It's a pretty, just that little story alone has really good lasting power. Like to me, that's a narrative that's like, that's really amazing that it kept on.
Definitely.
But I'm sort of curious, like when you guys were looking at this, what was the most compelling stuff that you, as when you were starting to research it, that you were like, this is crazy sauce, like I can't, like that was really interesting, but it was also like kind of fantastical. Like what was it about Coral Castle for you guys?
Well,
do you want to kick that off, Amber?
Oh gosh, well, specific to Coral Castle, because I think that's where my interest lies. Yours is a little bit more broad, hey Andrew.
Oh, sure.
But for me, oh my gosh, what was the most interesting or compelling? I feel like it was the story of the man, like we've been saying, and just how he suffered from, what was it, tuberculosis or whatever, his entire life, and how he went about, like, he didn't have the formal education that, a lot of people had, and he kind of made his way. And I feel like his story is exactly like you were saying, Chris, like that's the real, like, the real meat of it to me.
Yeah.
And just how he would have had to have devoted, like, he did devote his entire life.
You weigh 100 pounds, and even just to rig up like the tripod.
Even the tripod, exactly.
It's like 3
just the sheer
telephone
ability
poles. Like
of
those
that.
telephone poles are going to weigh like
they were huge.
1,000 pounds.
I saw that photograph of him. Like he's like, it's probably like 10 times tall as him, or 6 times at least.
I mean, like for me, the thing is, like, there's a bunch of stuff. There's the aspects of the background and his story that are where there's some inconsistencies that lead into the idea of there being sort of like a code that he might have left or something like that, like the idea of his Sweet 16 and the name Agnes Scuffs, and how when we're definitely pulling a little bit from Kristaps from the Eastern Border for this, but he basically said that looking into it, like, Agnes Scuffs wasn't a real person. There's no background of that. There's no
evidence that she existed.
And it translates in Latvian to innocent kiss, which is just.
And he wrote a treatise on morality that definitely referred to that.
Yeah, right.
I sure did.
It's just sort of and that is obscure.
It's distasteful.
Very That's some pretty weird stuff.
But even with that book, so Agnes Scuffs, like the name, not a real person, and then with that book he wrote, that's just totally bizarre. He leaves every other page blank. Which some people believe is obviously so you can fill in your own and try to read between the lines, pun intended, I guess. And
or how he phrased it, feel free to rewrite it if what I've written
feel free to
isn't
rewrite it.
satisfactory.
Does he mean to rewrite it by? I'm not saying it's an anagram, like there's or anything like that, but there's some sort of code in it
riddle.
possibly. And I thought that was interesting in the fact that Agnes Scuffs is not. There's no records to back up that was a real thing.
Honestly, that part to me. So for me, almost the story part. I think this is true with a lot of kind of interesting scientific figures, or just a lot of like. I think this is kind of part of like hero killing, or like, I don't know, like you look into your heroes, you look into the people that you look up to, whatever, and then you oftentimes will find things you don't like, right? And so with him, his story is sort of like he almost tells it as this. I don't know. To me, it always came across as this story of like a lot of people view it as kind of a forlorn love. Like he loved this girl back in Latvia, and then he never, it never happened, whatever. And so then he's kind of spurned by love. As like a right. He did this as sort of a love letter to her. But to me, it almost always kinds of like based on his treatise of morality or whatever. Like I don't know. He doesn't seem to really like that lady that much, right? Like he doesn't seem to really like
or some lady, whoever it is. I mean,
right? He doesn't really seem to have a very modern view of like women generally, I guess. But I mean, that's kind of like I mean, he was writing that in like, what year was he writing that? Like,
I think it was 1930, late 30s.
Yeah, like
you know what I mean?
School.
Like, and he was coming from Latvia. I think that there's a lot of
kind of more conservative generally.
Sort of things,
Definitely, yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, but so like to me though, the fact that Agnes Scuffs isn't a real name, that actually isn't that surprising to me. Like, I don't know if I would want, you know, I don't know. Like, I can't see someone putting their old flame on blast that he clearly feels so bad about it going the way it did, right? Yeah. Like, I don't think he would want that kind of attention given her or whatever. And maybe he was just frankly embarrassed, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know.
Well,
it is an interesting story.
If it was a code, so if it was a bigger thing and it was a code, then what's the cipher for it? Like, what's the, and did you guys have any research or anything that kind of dug anything up on that? Because that to me is interesting, because I felt like he did a lot of strange things that seemed symbolic, heavily symbolic.
Yeah,
so,
he definitely seems like the kind of person that would be into sort of puzzles and ciphers and things like that. Right?
When we looked
did
into
you guys find anything?
Well, for his book on morality, what was the actual title for that again? I don't have it right now in front of me, but I can't remember.
For that one, with vegetables and food.
There's a whole bunch of different crackpots out there with their interpretations of it. I don't think there's really been like I couldn't find any like peer-reviewed academic decoding of it or anything like that. It's just basically like a crackpot book.
Yet.
But
welcome to the podcasting world, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. But on the flip side, for his book on magnets, it makes a lot more sense for the first part of the book, and then when you go on YouTube and stuff, like, there are people recreating some of his experiments, and they are, you know, I mean, they're very similar to like basic magnetism experiments that I'm sure like you guys would be able to do, but it's like. Yeah, his book on morality.
Well, there's one called Mineral, Vegetable, and Animal Life, and I think that was the one that kind of went into
the moral one.
Yeah.
What a strange title for a book on that type of like.
It's something.
It's just a very odd guy. I have to say that so far I have to I'm leaning towards you guys, definitely. Like, we're always of the mind, like, we're always trying to search for the paranormal angle, and I'm always like, I want to believe,
include
you know what I mean?
Include the skeptic sort of angle.
But at the same time, no, I'm definitely buying into what you guys are saying, and the fact that a lot of this is basic physics, and like, we found some videos online too, like after Chris, you turned us on to like the old men that rebuild Stonehenge or whatever.
Yep.
And like, I found this one video of this one guy. He's just all by himself.
Amazing. He moved a barn by himself. He moved
an entire barn by himself. Like, just with
just pushed it.
Yeah, just like with certain leverage.
Yeah.
But basically, the video was for rebuilding Stonehenge, and it was like he would pour, you know, the concrete blocks, and then he had like a 2 2x4s coming off the side of it,
kinda
and
like
basically
wings.
like, you know, like a puzzle piece fitter on the top that would slide in over top. And then he would just put in little pebbles or little rocks,
little tiny rocks,
like wedge it underneath and leverage it forward so it would move a few feet, and he could move a 1-ton block, like.
And he could move it in a
far.
whole circle. He could push it forward and backward.
So I totally. Definitely a thing.
He could elevate it from being like horizontal to a complete vertical.
Just with using weights
wood
and
wedges
then with water. So like hosing out the ground to like get the sand to go away. So like it would just
like a
weight
teeter-totter.
itself up. Yeah, like a teeter-totter. And I get all that. I get all that stuff, and I think that Ed probably was employing a lot of those similar tactics for, you know, 80% of what he was doing, and some other stuff for different types for maybe the heavier stones he was working with or whatever. But the one thing that blows my mind that I do not understand is how the hell did he actually quarry it? Like, I get it, you can dig a pit and carve it out from the side, but how do you get that cut underneath? How do you cut out a 20-ton block of stone
he was
underneath
from a family of stone cutters.
by yourself?
Yeah, actually, that's actually a really well-known technique, too. There are also really good YouTube videos on that as well. Ancient masonry. Basically, what they do is... So rocks have... Just like wood has grains, rocks also have grains in them. Right?
Okay.
And so rocks will cleave, especially the rocks that we tend to use for masonry. They will cleave along grain boundaries. And so basically what you do is you chisel in... kind of evenly spaced apart, just kind of I guess pylons would be the word. I don't really know, but like you just chisel in these kind of metal rods, right? And then with enough force, with enough of those piled in, the rock will just cleave spontaneously. Not spontaneously, but it'll cleave by itself, just over its own, under its own pressure, basically.
Oh, okay.
It'll just cleave
split.
along a straight line. It'll
Yeah.
split. And that
Split.
split can go quite deep. And then you can do the same thing on the sides and basically just cleave out, as much stone as you want, pretty much. I mean, really, the quarrying part is actually probably the most, I don't know if the most well-known way to do it, but probably one of the easier ways to do it. He also likely had access to explosives. I mean, let's be honest,
we all
right?
do. Let's be honest. We all have
Okay,
explosives.
it's like the 20s, right? It's like the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, you could probably pick that up pretty much anywhere.
You could buy
Home
the stuff
Depot.
to make them. I mean, you can still buy. Like, it's we're gonna get put on a watch list, Marie.
I know. It's
so
like
super
easy.
hard to make.
Homeland
the amount
Securities
you
is
need to,
already
like,
like, please,
pop open a
Dr.
piece of rock."
Coxwell, just go ahead and explain to us where you're buying the fertilizer.
Right? Yeah. Go on, Mr. Cogswell.
Oh my
But
god.
I will say,
Yeah.
I think
So,
that
anyways, yeah.
I think that we naturally are more, science based, and I don't want to say buzz killers, but like we have a pretty rational explanation for coral casts. But what I would love to hear is kind of like what are the things that you guys heard that were sort of out there that kind of like sparked your interest about it? Because I think the thing it's when you demystify something, there's a little part of you that's like, oh. But you also have to appreciate it for the fact that there was just one man doing this. And again, like with the physics of that giant swinging gate that he had that was perfectly balanced, and just all this like really amazing stuff. So it's like a deeper appreciation maybe is what you gun for these types of things. But at the same time, I'm a junkie for the spooky stuff too.
Yeah.
So like, what did you guys come up with?
Do you want what do you got there?
Well, it's interesting, that you bring up the revolving door, because that was one of my initial questions. Is it took what was it, like a 6-ton crane and a crew of 6 people? A 20-ton crane and a crew of 6 to actually replace the block on top. Because they had to have that repair done or whatever, and how it still wasn't as perfect after they replaced it. So that to me was one of the initial like, what?
Yeah.
What? Like that's
so like there's
interesting.
still an element of lost knowledge, even if it is like simple physics. I feel like right?
I would agree, yeah.
Here's kind of the interesting thing is, here's kind of, I think, the way that I always view these questions or these ideas is, the problem in nature is always that you need enough energy to do something, and energy isn't free, right? That energy has to come from someplace. So, I mean, that's true of all processes, right? It's just basic thermodynamics. The energy you put in is equal to the energy you get out, either in terms of work or heat or whatever, right? So work and heat in equals work and heat out, plus some losses because we have the real world, so we have friction. Now, with things like moving giant stone blocks and stuff, the difference here is time, right? When we were building these monolithic giant structures, we had nothing but time on our hands. Right? Didn't matter if it took a whole pharaoh's rule to build the tomb that would house his body, right?
Yeah.
What mattered was that it got done. The pharaoh doesn't care, right? Who cares? It's all manual labor, right? So you actually have a gluttony of work. You have a gluttony of workers who can all input little bits of work, and they just, so you have more time than you have power, right? As the Industrial Revolution happened and as we became more technologically advanced, what happened was that power started to be a lot easier to get, right?
Yeah.
So now, as opposed to having, 6,000 workers move these stones over decades, we could have one bulldozer do it on on a tank of gas in an afternoon, right, in an hour. But that also then means that we've started to rely on those tools, right? So it's similar like a calculator.
Yeah.
people know how to do, like, before we had calculators, you had to memorize logarithm tables.
Right.
And you had to know all your multiplication tables and all the square roots of stuff and whatever, right? Today, you just pull out a calculator. You don't need to remember all that stuff. But if we were left without a calculator, we'd have no idea how to do any of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To me, it's the same way with these big structures. We used to be able to do it by hand because we had to.
Right.
But now over time, we've started to rely on these tools, so now we can't do it anymore on our own, right? So
that's such
to me.
Sorry,
it's almost like reverse evolution.
Sorry, Chris. Finish your thought there, but
yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, no, it absolutely is like reverse evolution, right? Like, I mean, when you know, I can't even remember who says this really cliched scientific quote, but it's, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Yeah, but we also are building the things that are figuring these things out. So it's like reverse evolution. It's almost like
we've just specialized ourselves to a certain way.
Yeah, in a sense. Well, I think actually, yeah, it's funny that you brought up the Industrial Revolution, Chris, because I have that way down in my notes here. How I thought like that was, obviously that was a turning point for just like just mankind, but also like a shift in a certain direction where certain types of knowledge had to have been, it had to be lost.
Well, it kind of almost reminds me of alchemy and then the scientific revolution.
We got into that with Travis too.
Definitely.
On the History of Alchemy
I feel like
podcast.
elements of Ed kind of mirror Paracelsus.
Yeah,
just in how kind of out there they were.
There's a little bit of that there. But to come back to your initial question there, Marie, like on what really was like crazy, like what we thought was insane, is really the whole idea of the magnets and the Earth's magnetic grid.
And what about his flywheel, too?
And that was a part of it, right?
Yeah.
It was like the magnetic flywheel. So, but basically...
Is that just some crazy experiment in his little basement dungeon where he was just like, I'm going to make this work?
It sort of seems that. Well,
I don't know.
That's so funny.
Or
like,
was
when
he
you
actually
look at the
using
pictures of Coral Castle, this guy was legit living in a dungeon.
Yeah.
Like, he lived in, like... He was, like, sleeping in, like,
there.
this, like... It was like it looks like a torture chamber,
cot.
and he was like sleeping there.
He didn't even have a mattress, I don't think. He's sleeping on the ground.
No.
Anyway, but for magnets, the idea that with his perpetual motion machine,
motion holder,
motion holder, he could generate an electric current, and through that current, start like right at the source,
the atomic level,
right at the source, and at the atomic level with this device, manipulate the magnetic orientation of particles in the air, I guess, like particles right in front of him, and therefore be able to, in conjunction with the object that he was trying to move, be able to, knowing the magnetic orientation of that object, be able to levitate that object.
But does limestone have a magnetic orientation?
Well, all objects do. That's
I guess
what
so,
we've
yeah.
talked
If we're talking about diamagnets,
that's the thing. It's like
paramagnets.
diamagnets and paramagnets. Do you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, like, what's your take on the diamagnet thing? Because that's kind of crazy. Like, the idea that, like, even like water is magnetic, and it's just.
Well, what were the other examples? Because we had a UCLA video that we watched, and this was actually originally sourced from a crazy South African guy named Michael Tellinger, and I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he is insane. He is, like I said earlier, he's the flat earther. He's also a Holocaust denier, a communist / anarchist, believes in free energy, and basically wants anarchism in the world. Yeah. So he's a nonsense purveyor. But I found through his video, there was this UCLA video that was actually talking about the science of paramagnetism and diamagnetism, which he was applying to all sorts of crazy stuff in his little lecture thing that I didn't actually listen to because it was like over an hour. But anyways, so we got into the topic of superconductors as diamagnets and how this could potentially levitate objects. We are talking about objects that are like basically at, absolute zero.
Right.
So it's not really something that I feel like Ed would have been...
He didn't have liquid nitrogen on hand.
And that's kind of the most recent... use. Like before it was like liquid helium or frozen helium or something, so like even colder.
I was gonna say you need liquid helium. You can't even do it with liquid nitrogen.
Oh dude, we actually came across a video. There was this guy, his name's Matthew Thomas Sturm. It was a TEDx youth talk, and he was inspired by those superconducting trains that are currently in operation in China. And so he wanted to demonstrate how superconductivity works on a miniature scale. And anyways, he did that. What was my point,
the magnets, right? The reverse magnets.
Yeah, and he actually created propulsion through magnets and stuff, and it was really cool. So anyways.
So is that something that, like, I know it's...
And my point was that he used liquid nitrogen.
Right, okay.
He was able to, and he was using ceramics, too, which was crazy.
That's interesting.
That was another sort of, that was really recent. From, like, 2015, they sort of developed that. Anyways.
So it's interesting. The public has, like, a total... The word ceramic for the public means complete... It's so different than what the scientific word for ceramics is, right? So ceramic engineering basically encompasses the use of all non-metal metalloid mixtures of solids. So things like zeolites, clays, hydroxyapatites, hydrotalcites.
Would those be considered organic? Or
no, they're inorganic. That's the thing. They're inorganic, right? So they're composed of silicon and aluminum primarily, with then other elements mixed in. So things like calcium or phosphorus in the case of like hydroxyapatite. But basically, a ceramic is a porous solid that has a crystal structure. Is basically what a ceramic is. And it's made up of a certain
crystalline solid.
And that's why.
Yeah,
and so when they were talking about the use of ceramics as superconductors, what they meant was basically aluminum or silicon oxides with other elements mixed in there inside the crystal lattice. Technically, silicon and aluminum are not crystalline on their own. Like glass is an amorphous solid, which means it's not crystalline. But anyways, whatever. But the basic idea is these things have very specific magnetic properties or interesting electrical properties that allow them to act as superconductors. So, but it's a ginormous field of engineering.
Yeah.
And superconducting properties only appear at very, very low temperatures. It seems to be an effect of the kind of transition from a normal kind of state where, things are in motion and whatever, to a state where things are nearly at zero movement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
I actually had a case from the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry in Mainz, Germany, that they made this, what's described as an extraordinary claim. So let's put that out there. That they had seen, this is a quote, they had seen hydrogen sulfide superconducting at minus 70 degrees Celsius. So is that, do you think that's complete BS?
That sounds like an extraordinary claim. Just to give you a sense of what, usually, the coldest that anything can get, by definition, is 0 Kelvin.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is that absolute zero?
That's absolute zero.
Okay,
0
cool.
Kelvin is absolute zero.
Okay.
The difference between Kelvin, 0 degrees Celsius is 273.15 degrees Kelvin.
Whew, okay.
Okay.
That's quite a jump.
minus 70 Celsius is 200 Kelvin. So 200 degrees above absolute zero.
Okay.
Most superconducting properties, don't quote me here, but usually occur somewhere below 10 Kelvin, somewhere around there.
Okay.
I want to say.
So just above absolute zero.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I think the coldest we've ever gotten anything is like 0.1 Kelvin, maybe? I don't know for sure, but we've never hit absolute zero. Yeah. And there is a lot of interesting questions about what happens at absolute zero, because there is so you guys mentioned a lot of things that are like interesting, but so perpetual motion. What does perpetual motion mean to everybody in the Skype chat?
Well, originally in my non-scientific mind, I was thinking it was something obviously in perpetual motion, but we were like kind of Googling around and watched some YouTube videos, and we kind of discovered that it's almost like a perpetual motion holder, as in like a circuit, like a magnetic or
when I hear that,
circuit?
I think that it means like it is its own energy. Like it starts moving and then it's going.
And it doesn't need another...
It's its own energy source.
Right.
It's its own
That's
source of
closer.
food.
You're closer to the truth.
It's also non-existent.
Marie is spot on, as
okay.
always. Marie is spot on. On. So what a perpetual motion machine is, basically, is a machine that you can get work out of without having to add in any energy.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Or rather, any further energy. So it's so right now in the universe, you cannot get if you add in a system, so in a we got to talk about so much thermodynamics now. This is so great.
Dude, I have notes from when, so I don't know if you guys know, but there was an episode where he taught me like thermodynamics 101, and then I taught him Star Wars.
Oh man, nice. I need to catch up on that one.
It's like the notes on the thermodynamics that I took were crazy. They were just like scroll. You want to talk about like, levitating giant rocks and stuff. I was like, work, and there was drawings, and I was trying to, but I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead. Yes, it doesn't exist because how I try to simplify it down is, again, if you were like, if thermodynamics in a human, you wouldn't eat, you wouldn't need sleep, you would just be self-sustaining.
Right. Okay.
Which is an impossibility. Like you always need to have some sort of input into your body to create the fuel to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to have an output.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Inputs
Really,
and
yeah.
outputs.
Super good.
Kind of important.
Super good. So in any system, you input. So again, all of chemistry, all of physics is basically accounting. Okay, it's counting up how much mass or energy did you put into a system, and how much of that do you get out. And a system is any closed. It's like a system can be anything. It's kind of a weird definition, but in this case, let's talk about an engine. Okay. So let's say if you input 10 kilograms of fuel, okay, and burning that 10 kilograms of fuel generates 20,000 kilojoules of energy, right? Then the most energy you can ever get out of that system is 20,000 kilojoules.
Right.
And the most mass you can ever get out is however much mass I said was going in.
10 something.
So 10 kilograms.
I forgot the unit.
So the mass in equals the mass out, and the energy in equals the energy out.
Okay.
Now, energy, though, can take on different forms. You can have heat or you can have work. Okay? Work is the ability to move something, so to apply a force over some distance. Okay? And heat is literally thermal energy that kind of just goes to the surroundings or can be used for different things.
Okay.
All right?
Is that like friction?
So,
is that friction? No.
Friction is something different. Friction is
okay.
actually friction is known as a loss.
Oh,
Friction is the
okay.
reason that perpetual motions of the second kind can't work.
Okay.
There's different types of perpetual motion machines. We're gonna get into all this.
Okay. All right.
Now,
Let's dig in.
if I'm sounding too much like a professor, you guys can like throw in a fart joke or something else. I promise.
We're going to talk about Star Wars now.
No.
Buddy.
Okay. So
at the end of this, the only thing I have to contribute at the end of this is a story that I just had with a bunch of doctors about the dragons in Game of Thrones. We'll get to that.
Okay.
nice.
Sounds good.
I'm excited.
Awesome.
Okay. So So let's talk about like a basic. The most basic engine is a piston and cylinder. Do you guys know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can picture it.
I can picture it.
All right, sweet. So in a piston and cylinder, you can add heat to the cylinder, to the contents in the cylinder. You add heat. That heat then causes the pressure of the gas inside the cylinder to rise,
Right.
and then that pressure causes the piston to move up.
Okay.
In that process, you have added heat, and then that heat has been converted to work, the work to move the piston up.
Right.
Okay. In the same way, you can then compress the piston so you can push down on the gas inside the cylinder and cause it to heat up, and then that heat will dissipate.
Okay.
Okay? That's converting work into heat. Now, in a perfect system where there are no losses of energy at all in that scenario, you could forever, if you could collect the heat that was coming out when you depressed the cylinder and use the work from when it was being pushed back up to make it into heat again, or more energy to push down the cylinder, you could have that system go forever.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not really possible?
No.
No, it's not possible because of entropy and specifically because of friction in a real environment.
Ooh, can you define entropy quickly?
So entropy literally means entropy means irreversible losses
Okay.
of energy.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So in that piston cylinder assembly, you would expect that some of the heat that you're adding to the piston, maybe all the heat you add actually gets applied, but some of the force of that gas is going to go to like the walls of the the container, right? And some of the energy is going to go to overcoming the friction of the piston on the cylinder wall.
Right.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you actually
Inevitable
let the
loss.
system so if you actually let the system run, what would happen is eventually, even if it was collecting all the work at the other end and all the heat on the inside, however it was working cyclically, eventually the engine would stop because there was not enough work anymore to actually push the piston up.
So it can't be a perpetual motion.
Interesting.
So it cannot be in perpetual motion.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
That is that's called a perpetual motion machine of the second type, which means that it breaks the second law of thermodynamics, which is the law of entropy.
Gotcha.
Huh.
Okay.
Okay.
A perpetual motion machine of the first type is one that produces work with no input of heat.
Okay.
So you don't add any energy in, but it just makes work.
Right.
She don't have energy,
Okay.
but it makes work. Could that be potentially the hypothetical of the flywheel that was in Coral Castle?
No, because the way that it's okay. So here's the thing. The closest we have ever gotten to a perpetual motion machine, you guys are never gonna guess what it is.
What is it? Tell us. An MRI machine?
I'll give you. Nope. I'll give you each. No, not even close. And then, okay, the process of cooling stuff down is one of the most inefficient processes in nature. Heating stuff up is one of the most efficient. Cooling off is the opposite. It's like making an engine run in reverse.
You guys were warm when you were talking about the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
Oh.
What was the biggest thing one of the biggest things that came out of the Industrial Revolution?
Well, combustible.
Combustion engines.
Right, combustion. Okay.
Okay.
So theoretically, the most efficient a combustion engine can be is like 33%.
Wow.
Efficient.
Crazy.
Which means that 33% of the heat gets converted to work.
What?
Wow.
So 66%
most-
is loss? Or
Yes,
67?
as friction, as just losses to the environment, whatever.
Okay.
Wow.
It's called the Carnot cycle, CARNOT, and then the Rankine cycle is the one RANKINE is the one for steam. It's a steam engine cycle.
Right.
Interesting.
Basically, our engines have not changed at all since the Industrial Revolution. Primarily,
Yeah.
they still run on for the most part, you make something burn or you make something produce heat. That heat then causes water to boil, and that boiled water converts that heat into work by pushing on pistons and cylinders or a turbine or something.
Right.
Very cool. So
Okay,
on the flip
now-
side then, oh sorry. Okay, wait, I'll let you finish that. Yeah.
No.
Sorry.
Okay, so
I'm
the
interrupting
closest
the
it's okay. The closest we've ever gotten to a perpetual motion machine is actually one of those drinky bird things.
Oh my god! Like from
what?
The Simpsons, where Homer leaves the office and he just
Yes,
puts the thing down.
a million
and then
percent. They are comically efficient. They are extremely interesting in terms of thermodynamics. They actually show a really cool topic called exergy really well, which is the available work, not just the actual work. It's like really nerdy, but one of the most famous problems in thermodynamics involves a drinky bird. It is known as the drinky bird problem. It is in a very famous thermodynamics for engineers textbook. And the question was originally developed at MIT in like the 1960s, 50s maybe. Anyways, whatever, it doesn't matter. The flywheel is just another motor. It's just another engine.
Okay.
Now, the way that because flywheels are in like we use them. We've used them forever. Flywheels are used in lawnmowers, I think, still today.
Oh.
In some other types of motors and things.
Okay.
The basic idea of a flywheel is that what a flywheel does is it converts. This is what all this is what all electrical generators do, is they convert work, so mechanical energy, into electrical energy. And the way that they do that is by spinning a magnet around a central point, which creates a magnetic field.
Okay.
So that's all that was basically.
Yeah. So all the flywheel was him messing around with an engine in his spare time.
So you don't think there's any connection with that into what he was doing for the actual construction?
No.
Okay.
No. And if any of the ancient alien hypothesis guys had ever I don't know, taken apart a lawnmower or anything, they would know that.
Do you really think that Giorgio's taken apart
They
a
seem
lawnmower?
like more like armchair theorists.
Yeah, I mean, like, I hate to go so hard on them because I actually love the show.
Oh, it's a great show.
But they've got to get better material. Like, guys, call me, please. I promise we'll come up with a better season.
No kidding.
Giorgio's not even the worst one. Giorgio's, like, probably one of the more sensible ones on that damn show. Like, you know what I mean?
I know, right?
You got, oh my goodness. Anyways, so so the Flywheel, in my opinion, like, the Flywheel is just a misunderstood,
right.
like,
just a component.
We came across that too, like from a lot of the things we looked at. That was the general consensus, I think. For the most part.
The thing is too,
from the more rational sources.
Yeah.
We got to remember when this guy was operating too, right? Like, we didn't have a working model of magnetism, I want to say, until the 40s.
Right. Ooh, so this is at the tail end of him doing it then.
Yeah, like, we really didn't know a lot about how magnetic moments were caused. Like, you know, so I'm actually pulling it up now here. It's the Bohr-van Leeuwen theorem, which actually determines, or actually kind of tells us how magnetism works. It was actually interestingly, part of Niels Bohr's doctoral dissertation.
Really?
Which is super interesting.
Yeah.
It was in 1911 that he had published it, and then in 1919, Hendrika Johanna von Leeuwen had actually republished it.
Interesting.
And then in 1932, von Vleck formalized and expanded the theorem in a book on electrical susceptibilities. Now, so really, like, at the highest levels of physics, we were just starting to talk about this stuff, right? About how a magnet really works and what makes something magnetic. And even today, it's like one of the least understood areas of material science is how magnets form. You know, how can we still basically are stuck with finding that a material is magnetic in nature and then either mining the crap out of it and try to find as much of it as we possibly can. Yeah. Or trying to find ways to, like, develop new ones. But that process is super hard and super rare. I actually know a guy who did his, or is still doing, I think, his dissertation on that exact topic.
Interesting.
Right?
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Because the use of magnets, primarily for industry and stuff, we use what are known as rare earth element magnets.
Okay.
And those are elements that are, they're not necessarily rare in the sense of, like, rarity on the surface of the earth. They're just a special, like, class of materials, or elements. But basically the problem with them is that some of them are becoming very rare because we've used them so damn much. Right.
So is that the stuff that's in our phones and stuff, or?
Yeah, and that is exactly why now you can get money for recycling your old phones.
Interesting. Right. Okay.
Is because it costs less for them to offer you, the consumer, money than it is for them to, like, try to get mining rights for North Korea.
Yeah.
Right? Like North Korea, that's actually true. North Korea sits on, I think, the world's largest untapped reserve of rare earth elements.
What? That's their one bargaining chip.
They're actually extremely mineral rich. So, and it's a huge bargaining chip. Like, eventually we're going to run out of neodymium. And we're going to run out
Kim Jong-un, he's waiting for it.
Niobium and whatever. Oh, he can't wait. Are you kidding me? We're going to have to give him all of our basketball players. Like, forget Rodman. He's going to get some others too. You know, it's rough.
Oh, man. LeBron's going to have to get a summer house in Pyongyang. I don't know if Kim's going to be on that, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, okay. Well, on that note, like, okay, so you're saying, even at the tail end of, like, the 30s and moving into the 40s, we didn't know a ton about magnets and magnetism, and we still don't.
Sure the public did not know anything about any of this stuff.
So definitely not about diamagnets then.
No.
Okay. Because,
well,
I feel like, even if it's a possibility, like, I feel like the fact that Ed, like, I don't want to come back to this whole thing with being like, oh, you only have 4th grade education and he was from Latvia and this and that. It's like anybody can learn if they want to. Or, you can find a way to learn the knowledge that you want to gain, right? Through experimentation, through just his travels. You know, there was speculation that as he was working in mining and logging and moving around, that he probably figured out how to do like 90% of what he did just from trial and error and watching these like, you know, mass scale industries.
Worked. Yeah, because it would have been quite
but at the same time, the idea of diamagnetism is like so fascinating to me. The idea that like if you could if you could manipulate the magnetic orientation of a particle, then you could theoretically, you know, have a chain reaction from that, I guess, like is how I'm picturing it in my head.
But here's the thing, right? Just because we didn't have a good working mathematical model of magnetism doesn't mean we didn't know about magnets.
No, not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we knew about magnets and how to make things magnetic since the Industrial Revolution. Right? So we're talking like 1830s, 1840s.
Oh, well, people have been...
We knew...
Totally. I mean, in ancient China, like, magnets have been used for healing since, like, 2500
absolutely.
BC.
Yeah.
So, like...
And there's so the idea that, like, he would have... Anyone interested in science would have known about magnets, would have known about diamagnetism, would have known about how to make a non-magnetic material magnetic by applying electrical charge.
Okay.
Like, all of that would have been known.
Right.
All of that could have been very well known very easily. In fact, auto mechanics, like, this is around the time that cars started to really be widely used, right? Like, any auto mechanic worth their salt has to know about magnetism, at least in some ways, because that's, again, how the engine runs, right? Like, it's how that work gets converted to energy and vice versa. Okay. So, actually, at that time, it's internal combustion, so never mind. But still, like, any mechanic, anyone with any kind of mechanical inclination would have known about this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, in terms of let's say, like, here's the thing. So the idea is that Ed had some method whereby he was able to basically turn non-magnetic materials magnetic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If he had known how to do that, he would have won the Nobel Prize in physics.
Mm-hmm. But he was a weirdo. He didn't want to win the Nobel Prize, maybe.
Even your comment, I'm just like, why the heck, if he had some crazy secret knowledge, why wasn't the U.S. government just why did they steal him away and just like lock him in a dungeon? And exactly. Put him in a lab.
I guarantee they checked him out.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like I guarantee they at least went to go see what the hell he was building when they got this word that something weird was happening. Like, if he was
especially
able to
if he's from Latvia, they're going to check him out.
Well, and
right? But I mean, really, that they're seriously,
that Dan Kristaps, we can't trust him.
The American government would check out Latvia just to make sure he wasn't a commie pinko sympathizer that came into the country illegally.
Sure.
Right.
And I mean, look, like even if there was a chance that this was true, that he was able to do this stuff, he would have been so revolutionary and so important to the advancement of mankind that there is no possible, like, again, if you were able to do that, if you were able to levitate objects, right? That means that you are able to break one of the fundamental laws of nature, right?
Yeah.
The first law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have discovered a whole new physics. And if that was the case, if you were able to do that, and you had any kind of damn common sense about you, you would not be using it to move around stones like a jackass.
Yeah.
Right? You would be using it if you were able to move things like that, you know what I would do? I would attach it to a giant lever, right?
Yeah.
That's attached to a turbine. Okay? That's moving whatever energy around. That's got magnetic pieces on it. And I would be turning that damn thing to fill up batteries and then sell them.
Totally, right? No, for sure.
Because you have made free energy there.
Yeah. On the one hand,
you are now a god. Everything is possible.
I know, right? It's like, but at the same time, when I'm thinking about, because we talked about this too. Like we're like, why wouldn't you have tried to monetize it? Why wouldn't you have bragged about it? Like, it's kind of funny. On the one hand, we were like, oh, maybe he was really into being secretive. He really liked being, keeping it hush hush because he thought it was mysterious and he liked being that guy. But at the same time, why wouldn't you have been bragging about this, or why wouldn't you have told people? But then it's like, when you look at where he came from, it's like, okay, he's a Latvian immigrant. His entire family's either killed off during a revolution or, what have you.
Somewhere.
He comes to North America. He's struggling health-wise and financially. He makes his way to the U.S. He doesn't have any patriotism to America. He has no reason to bring this gift. If you believe he does know how to do something, he had no reason to tell anyone.
Maybe he's looking down on the whole.
Yeah, I mean, he was just jaded from.
Who
if
knows?
you believe the
This
Sweet
is a lot of
16 thing, or if you believe whatever, but he wasn't necessarily in a position where you just be like...
He did make very persnickety comments about how scientists, like he just branded, like it was just widespread, scientists are only seeing, this is a quote, 1/2 of the whole concept and using one-sided tools of measurement. So he's kind of like, just like being like, oh, you guys don't even know, like kind of thing, right?
I mean, but you know what though? Then if that's true... right, that he was hiding it because he liked it to be hidden or whatever, then he is the worst person in all of human history.
Right?
Almost.
Because then
but maybe he is super jaded, and he's like, you know what? Screw all of you. I'm just gonna make myself into a legend.
I mean? It's like those people that claim that, like, I saw 9/11 happening. Like, well, then you're the worst person I've ever met. You got to tell someone, right? Like, it's the same
before
thing
it happened?
Here.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like if he figured out a way to create free energy, he could alleviate poverty. He could, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, all of the world's problems would end.
Yeah.
But instead, he's upset that his girlfriend back in middle school or high school, or whatever the hell was he, 16? So high school, right?
Yeah.
Like... this girl that he liked didn't want to talk to him, or his parents didn't like him, or whatever the hell it was, and so he's decided to doom the entire human race.
That's one way.
It's a terrible story.
Makes a lot of sense, right?
It's a terrible story then for him. Like the thing that I don't understand with it is, so this actually plays into a larger conspiracy theory idea, which is that the government has this technology that, and we're actually going to talk about this on our upcoming episode this week.
Cool.
Nice.
That the government has access to this technology, but is keeping it secret because the government would like basically everything to run its course normally, because they're too afraid of the consequences.
Industries being destroyed, basically.
Yeah, kind of, right?
Okay.
But that has never ever been the history of capitalism. Right?
Right.
The guy that develops the CD player doesn't not bring it to market because he's afraid of what the VHS guy is going to do.
Right.
Or the Betamax guy, right? No one cares. You bring it to market. Like, that's the way it happens, right?
Yeah.
Well, but
Something so
Chris, I would
radical.
say that, like, if you're gonna, if so, let's again presupposing he had this gift or this whatever, this ability, and he actively chose not to use it. We're putting a certain lens on it that would make the assumption that is for the detriment, right? Like, maybe
Right.
I would just argue maybe he was thinking, okay, again, like, if you believe any of this is true, then maybe he was thinking, I'm just going to move rocks and do really simple things with this because this knowledge could be too
Fall into the wrong hands.
the wrong hand.
Yeah.
The in the wrong hands
yeah.
argument, which is always one of my favorites. But still, I see you shaking your head over there. I know what you're thinking. But, I mean, again, it's like, it's impossible to kind of say why somebody did or didn't do something, or why, especially to prove the negative
Right.
on someone
Right.
who
Yeah.
is a singular person, which, again, like, even if he did have it or if he didn't have it, it's an impossible thing to really prove.
Totally.
I think he clearly had something that was an above average intelligence to be able to understand this and to be able to work through everything else and be single-minded and again, live this very austere, like monk monastery lifestyle to begin with. Not that I'm glamorizing that, but I mean, he also had some strong views that he was, socializing in his pamphlets. But I think that it's very difficult to try and figure out kind of what that motivation was.
Yeah.
And that's even more of the
That's
mystery,
the real mystery.
Right? It's like,
Yeah.
why would you do this? Like, why wouldn't you go to work for Disney? Oh, no, I'm just joking. You could have been an Imagineer. Sure. No,
great.
I think that that's the thing that's really kind of the puzzle about this. It's like, why this? Not so much that you could move a ginormous rock with your mind, but why did you just like live in this small space, and this is what you did? It's kind of like, to me, that's
and then write a book about it. Why write the book on magnetism if it's just total BS? And the only explanation for that is that you're crazy. That's the only explanation. There's either elements of truth or you're batshit nuts. That's
I would say that. I mean, I don't think it's that. You know what I think it is? I think that people throughout history have misconstrued basic physics and basic science for magic in different ways.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, when someone walks on hot coals or something.
Or
right?
Yeah.
Or you see a Shaolin, like a kung fu guy, right?
Sure.
With he puts, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these YouTube videos. Again, I watch a lot of weird YouTube, where they
This is the fourth reference to you.
There's this. I'm so sorry. There's a specific type of kung fu that's like, I think it's called like, it starts with a G. I don't know the name of it actually. I'm not even going to try to attempt to say it, but basically, it's this idea that these guys can they can focus.
Jay, and it's Jedi is what you're thinking.
It's not. I think it's like Gong Shu or like Gong Yang. I don't know. But anyways, the idea is that these people can focus their chi energy into a certain part of their body, and then it allows them to basically do all these crazy feats. Like they can they'll focus it into their arms, and then people can they can break metal rods over their arms, or they'll put it on their throat.
Yeah.
And then they'll stop a spear from, someone will push a spear in and it'll actually break in half before it goes through.
Wow.
Them, right?
Oh, we've seen that with when they were canning themsels. You remember?
Oh my god, have you seen that same idea where they're getting punched in the nuts?
Yeah.
But they're like
Yes. Actually, okay, this is a side thing. There's actually a really interesting technique in mantis style where you actually suck the testicles into your body.
What?
Why do you know
true.
this?
That's a thing.
I watched a YouTube video on it. But anyways,
YouTube.
there's a really good documentary series on like kung fu and the different styles and whatever, where they show a guy do that technique actually.
Crazy.
So they have this Western announcer, and the guy's like, "Kick me," and he's like, "What?" He's like, "Kick me in the nuts. They're not there right now."
Oh my god.
Mantis style.
That's a
You're like, "Oh
skill.
my god."
Style.
Anyways,
Big skill.
so it's a great skill to have. I don't know.
Girls
I don't know if
like
it's a great
guys with
skill to have.
skills.
Anyways.
Anyway,
Where were we? I can't even remember.
Hey, you want to come back to my apartment and see what
magic.
I can do? Like,
Hey, thanks for having us on. This has been
this has been great.
It's been a great time, guys.
Okay.
No, but it's funny that you mentioned
illuminating.
Sorry, just to get back to the whole, like you're saying, like people misconstrue physics for magic. I had an experience, and it was on YouTube the other day. I was watching a video, and it was crazy. It was from this Tel Aviv university, and they were demonstrating quantum locking with superconductors. Again, bringing up superconductors. I definitely looked into that a bit. But they were like freezing these objects in space. Like it was crazy. It was really cool. That was magic to me. Like I've never seen that in my life. And I probably will never see it in person, but I was like totally amazed by it.
Locking,
and that's actually it's obviously science. It obviously exists. It was in a university, and they were demonstrating it.
I guess kind of where I was going with it, rather, was that a person can believe in something so strongly that to them, what they are doing, because it's been built up in such a way, it is magic, or it has magical significance, right? So, so it's kind of partly like, I often wonder, do the people on TV who claim to like see ghosts or be able to talk to passed on loved ones or whatever, have they just actually tricked themselves into thinking that the cues, the things that they're picking up about this person, that those really are spirit talking to them?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And it's the same way here. Like, I wonder if he didn't actually believe that he had some magical power. I mean, again, this man is living alone. He's living this monk austere lifestyle.
Right.
Who knows?
It is very conducive to extreme kind of religious experience, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
We know what solitary
to a certain degree.
Well, we know what solitary confinement can do to a person after only 6 hours, right? It's the same thing here. This man might have been going for stretches at a time where he didn't see another human being. To me, it would not be out of the question to think that he really did buy into his own kind of mythos, right?
Yeah.
So to me, but I hesitate though to say that he was sort of mentally ill or out of, whatever, right? I hesitate to say that because, clearly he was focused on doing this, on achieving this thing, but at the same time, it's sort of, I wonder. I don't think he was a charlatan. I don't think that he was
not a trickster.
No, I agree.
I agree as well.
No, I agree.
I think that's the wrong word. I think that he was. I think almost he was tricked. He tricked himself.
Yeah, I can get that. I can jump on board with that theory for sure.
Yeah,
again, it's not all that different than Disney.
No,
there
not
you
at all.
go.
Right?
No,
Sorry.
no, it's really not. You know what?
Circle.
I mean, no, honestly, like we hear that a lot with with other kind of magical ways of thinking or magical cults or whatever. Like people believe that they are so important or so special that the world bends to their will, right?
Yeah.
And you see it a lot of the times in like cases with serial killers or criminals or whatever, where they're like, well, I just never thought I'd get caught, or they, things seem to happen and fall into place for them in these weird kind of what appear to be synchronicities,
Right.
but are really just coincidences, right? But it's that over time you build up these coincidences in your head into an overall mythos that, clear, like God really does want me to do this,
Right.
Right?
And,
yeah.
And like if people
there really
are
is
watching
something special
too,
here.
then like he's got these people coming peeking through the bushes and stuff like that, and like you mentioned earlier, like I get that, like that would just add into it as well. And
and the fact too that everyone is coming by and being like, how the hell did you do this, right? And he's thinking like, well, there's no, it's almost like it's kind of akin in my mind to like someone asks you a really difficult, or you guys ever like in school you study for a big test, and then you get to the day of the test and the test is super easy, and you leave and you're like, did I just totally screw that up, or was that just like an easy 100?
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost the same way. He's like, he just knows how to do this stuff from his whole lifetime of doing this kind of stuff, and he's like, well, either these people are really dumb or I'm just like super out of the ordinary.
Right.
And that's just it.
Right,
I think
and over
he
time,
was
he just
just
builds it
super
up.
out of the ordinary because
and he
Well,
was
the thing is, that's the
transplanted
thing
to a new
too.
country, new people, and perhaps this new climate. He's kind of realizing like these people, they don't really have the same background.
Like he
perhaps.
really was.
Yeah.
He really was out of the ordinary, and he was actually in some ways like a genius of stonemasonry and construction, right? Like this, we can't take away from the amazingness of what he did, but I don't know. I just
here's an interesting tidbit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Marie.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I have this down in my notes here that I thought was interesting that I forgot to mention earlier. I couldn't find anything to back it up, but supposedly one of the first people he met when he came to the States was Nikola Tesla. And
I heard this one,
and that and
in New York, right?
Yeah, and that he like met with him and they were chatting about just magnets and stuff, and that he possibly got some of these ideas from Tesla to apply.
So here's the weird thing is that we did prove that Tesla was in New York at the same time.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So could
We did prove that. Yeah, like there's historical documents saying that he was at X salon, or he was at, because it was very well documented about any kind of social event.
Right.
So it lists the time frames that he was a part of it.
I just found that so interesting in contrast to like the stuff that you're saying, Chris, where it's like, and I totally agree with both of you guys, where it's like, like he created his own mythos of himself in a sense, like just from the lifestyle and from the project and from his background potentially and being jaded or whatever. But then there's like some of these other elements of like obviously like applied physics that's simple, but somehow it's been lost to the everyday person who's knows regular physics in the 1940s or 30s.
We just have no need to use it.
Or no need to use it, right?
we
Because
just
you've got a bulldozer or a crane or whatever. But it's just still an interesting contrast, I think.
And you can, again, it's all exposition, but like, why him and Tesla were both immigrants.
Right.
They were both
Right.
sort of antisocial. They were both highly intelligent. You know, it's like, of course, there's no actual documented anything about that. But to me, like, that's the part of the narrative, like, about any of this stuff. I think, like, Chris and I talk about this a lot. It's like the story is really what's the interesting thing. The science is what sort of gives it context and gives it life, but the story of what he was about and who he was, that's really what is the most, to me,
it's compelling.
the thing that keeps people coming back,
Yeah.
especially with, you know, when you start to talk about Tesla.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Stuff like that.
No kidding, right?
Yeah, the thing I find fascinating actually with Tesla is sort of the
death ray. It's the death ray.
yeah, it's the death ray. You know,
No, man, come on. There's
It's
nothing
kind of
more
like-
interesting than the death ray.
I'm gonna
That's
say
the next episode, though.
don't get me started on that, you know. But the idea of that idea again, like Tesla. If we take every WordPress site with a starry background as true, then Nikola Tesla met with every single major occult figure in the last 1,000 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Tesla becomes one of these lightning rods of like scientific. I don't even know what the word is. Kind of like scientific mythology.
Yeah.
Right? He's almost become like the modern day Merlin. People view him as this genius, and he was a genius, you know, but not in the way that a lot of people think he was, right? And again, it's this sort of like,
but he was there. He was there at the same time.
Oh, no. I'm not saying.
I'm
like,
not saying
actually,
I'm throwing up a website with a starry background. I'm just saying.
There's a chance.
No.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yes, I might.
There's a chance.
There's a chance.
I'm not trying to discount that. I'm not trying to discount that idea, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that again, it's one of those like,
Or
I
the death
wonder-
ray. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
Don't discount the death ray.
Don't discount the
Totally,
death
it's a
ray.
real thing,
I
man.
promise. You know what I find? I've actually one of the reasons why I really like this, story actually for me personally is that I see a lot of commonalities in some ways to kind of my own family story, in that, you know, my grandma had a really bad time in Croatia where she grew up, and actually we're not even sure if she really. We know she lived in Croatia, but we have no idea where her parents were from. We think maybe Austria. Like, there's really not a lot of story there. And it's because she had such a terrible time and just has a lot of bad memories and stuff of kind of her childhood and growing up and it being hard and there being war and everything else. And so, you know, when she moved to America in the like the late 50s, early 60s, you know, I don't know if my grandma ever met another Croatian.
Yeah.
You know, she like went out of her way to like kind of not talk about that time of her life, right?
Yeah.
And it has become its sort of own mythology within my own family of, you know, well, what was Nona doing? You know what I mean? Like, what happened? Whatever,
Nona
right?
was
Like,
meeting with Nikola Tesla.
You know what I mean? Like,
have.
it even in our own family, it's become this whole big thing. And so I can only imagine how it blows up when a person doesn't even have a family around.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
To kind of normalize them.
All the mystery,
or,
yeah.
You know, he kind of was the perfect, in some ways, kind of the perfect outcast in American society at the time, right? He didn't have a family. He was a bachelor. He
Very eligible bachelor. Maybe
well,
not
you know
so
what I mean? Like, literally though, like he was he was foreign. He was from a country that a lot of them had probably never even heard of.
Yeah, very true.
Right? You know,
he had a death ray.
He had a death ray in his backyard. Like, I don't know. So I find the story interesting.
He
I
could
just love
summon lightning. I mean, come on, man. And he had that stash. He's like one of the few scientists that really could work that stash.
Oh, I'm not even talking about Tesla. I'm talking about Ed.
Oh, are you? I'm still with Tesla. I'm still all hung up on
That's
Tesla.
okay.
Anyways.
No, Tesla's weird too.
I do have to say, this has been a really wonderful chat with you guys.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been really cool.
Absolutely.
We would love to do this again.
Yeah.
Sometime soon.
Hell yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Next time we'll go into Star Wars.
Sounds good.
And we'll make Chris name some Sith Lords and see how that happens. We'll be like, so Chris.
Awesome.
All right,
Yeah,
sounds
teasing.
good.
Sounds like a date.
I'm teasing him. That sounds good. Well, you guys, Chris, do you want to tell them where they can reach us at?
Yes. Give all the info, please.
You can reach us at www.deathray.org.
Which is
You can reach us at the Mad Scientist. The MadScientistPodcast.com. You can find us at Mad Scientist Pod on Twitter or at Team Giant Squid. That's Squid with a Q.
Yeah.
That's Marie's Twitter handle. You can also always reach us at the Mad Scientist Podcast at gmail.com. And of course, you can find us on all of your favorite audio listening devices, platforms, all that good stuff. Our logo is the one with a jack-o'-lantern, so it's easy to find.
Cool.
Perfect.
Love it.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
thank you
guys.
again. And yeah, we look forward to doing it again sometime real soon.
Yeah. Talk to you guys soon.
And now for a quick word from our friends over at the Fiercely Altered Perspective podcast.
Hi, I'm Quinn,
And I'm Ember,
and this is the Fat Pod.
also known as the Fiercely Altered Perspective podcast.
Here we take topics and put our own twist on them, giving you another perspective to stories that you know and love, and some you've never heard about, combining our interests, deep research, humor, and storytelling into one complex podcast.
Talking heavy on true crime, plus other great topics such as vampires, cults, cannibalism, aliens, conspiracy theories, mythology, folklore, creepy history, and how the hell we haven't managed to completely kill off the human race.
You can subscribe to us anywhere podcasts can be found, simply by searching for Fiercely Altered Perspective. Be sure to follow us on social media, all at The Fat Pod, and join our Facebook group, The Fap Lounge, to join our discussion threads, to give us your perspective on each episode and get a chance to get a shout out on the next show.
All right. Well, that was something.
That was a lot of fun.
That was awesome.
Super informative. Those guys are great.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's-
Just upping the intellectual level of the conversation.
Up in the ante for Into the Portal a little bit. Yeah, I'd say
Playing
so.
the rational scientist too, you know.
Well, you know,
skeptical approach.
that's why we wanted to bring them on.
Yep.
Because this is an episode that demands science. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is pseudoscience.
And a lot of it is stuff that we are completely unfamiliar
Noobs.
with.
Yeah.
And
We
we
don't
have
know
never
any.
been exposed to before. A lot of
Exactly.
even just the basic terminology. So it's nice to have someone clarify. Like even it's so funny what Chris is saying, like ceramics are not ceramics.
Yeah. I'm just
That
thinking,
was eye opening to me.
yeah,
I
I'm
was
thinking like a
okay.
coffee cup.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like when
oh,
I hear
totally
that
was
word,
too.
like that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But
Nope,
interesting.
definitely not.
So in science is a
So,
different
because
thing.
like
It's
for
essentially
in my
metal.
mind, I was almost like, okay, well, ceramics can do it, then limestone can do it, and you know, like it all makes sense. But yeah, it was great though.
Right.
Like that, yeah. So
But at
what
the end of the
was-
day,
okay,
I mean, well, okay,
yeah.
so what you're gonna ask me what I took from it?
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
so. At the end of the day,
At the end of the day, I mean, obviously both of them, like we just said, they're leaning towards the skeptic side.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to tend to agree with them to a certain extent. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that a vast majority of what Ed accomplished and what has been accomplished in cases like Stonehenge and the Easter Island Heads, walking the
Moai.
Moai, was physics, was just simple leveraging and stuff like that. But I personally feel like that only takes you so far. You know, when you see, I feel like it's kind of like an oxymoron to say that he used simple physics, but for some reason nowadays we don't understand that simple physics. Right? Or like some people
beyond
do.
us.
Like we watched videos of people, you know, a guy who, you know, he
moved a barn.
He moved a barn by himself.
how
right? Like,
big
he
was
moved-
that? Like
Right?
concrete block
These
that he
things
moved?
happen.
You know? Yeah.
It's just there's aspects of it that I just can't. I think has to be something else there. There's got to be something extra that Ed knew to levitate those big ones to make it as perfect as it was, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going to get into some of his ideas in a sec, but what did you take away from that?
I tended to agree with basically everything that those two had to say.
Yeah.
It's almost like discrediting him and then the achievements of so many civilizations before us, all the ingenuity, all of the technical skills and everything that they would have used without the use of machinery.
To
obviously
think
without
that
the
it's just
knowledge.
like, you know,
to
magic
think
or
that it
something.
is something beyond human capability. Like, and then that's where I'm leaning. Yeah, like when you start bringing in ancient aliens into the conversation, that's what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and so, I agree with you as well, though. Like, I feel like this guy. It seems bizarre to think that he would devote so much of his life to this project.
Yeah.
And so much focus on this theory of magnetism that he supposedly was able to put into practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got what Chris and Marie were saying with the point that, like, well, especially Chris, where he was basically like, why, if you knew, if there was something beyond just the simple physics aspects of this, why wouldn't you have, like, monetized it, or why wouldn't you have brought it to the world? Because you'd be, like, making the world such a better place.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, this is my devil's advocate hat on for that. And it makes me think, like, okay, well, what about all the oil tycoons that are going to say no to that, right? Like, there's a reason why green energy hasn't become a thing in our modern times, right?
True.
Because there's industries that are making too much money and they stifle it. So there's that aspect of it, if he was thinking about it that way. Or also just the fact that this guy was a total eccentric.
And he's a non-patriot, too.
He's not an American citizen. Yeah, he was a non-patriot. He was living in a friggin' dungeon.
He refused to go to war for them.
He barely ate anything. This guy, like, he was obviously just, like, an eccentric genius. And... But eccentric being the optimal word here. He wasn't making necessarily rational choices, but he was coming up with supernatural results from what he was doing.
Especially if you do believe the more fantastical elements of the story, like the anecdote from the truck driver when he was transporting Coral Castle or Rockgate or whatever you want to call it.
Rockgate.
But anyways, yeah. So... let's talk about magnetism.
Let's talk about magnets, yeah.
So,
okay,
Ed had a lot of ideas regarding magnets.
Yes,
he
did.
basically had this idea that all matter is made out of individual magnets. So that actually does make sense when you look at on the atomic level.
Right.
Because we know from what science knows of magnets is that...
which isn't everything, which is what Chris talked about.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's still a lot...
I know some stuff.
There's a lot of unknowns about gravity and magnets still.
That's very true. But, yeah. No, like, I saw that UCLA video that was talking about... or was it the UCLA video, or was it just the magnets video?
I can't recall, but it was a...
but it was talking about the atomic level and how at the level of the particle...
yes.
The atom... you get an actual field, a toroidal field. Is that what it was called?
I think so.
Or something like that. And it's just, it does actually correlate to Ed's ideas. Like, he wasn't far off with that.
Right.
It's just a matter of when you get to the actual physical level of matter, so a bunch of atoms together.
Right.
Doesn't always result in the same thing. You can't always,
the thing is like, this kind of stuff, like the idea that Ed was possibly able to, like you're describing on the atomic level, manipulate basically the orientation of the electron movement and therefore the magnetic field of each individual particle,
or the individual north-south pole magnets. Right. He talked a lot about the alternations between the two.
Right. And that's where I feel like his perpetual motion holder that we sort of loosely touched on with Chris and Marie, which was basically like a horseshoe magnet shaped looking thing that was essentially just like an electromagnet that he was powering through his, presumably the flywheel that we discussed, an electric flywheel. Yeah. And he called his perpetual motion holder. Now, perpetual motion is something that comes up in like quantum physics when we were looking at particles. Like, we watched that one video as well where it's saying, like, when you are looking at a particle, you are only seeing it viewed in one space, but it is in perpetual motion.
Right.
Right? And I mean, I am not a physicist.
No.
But I feel like that sort of makes me think about the ideas that Ed had with perpetual motion in terms of magnetism of individual particles. Mm-hmm. And that he was possibly operating on quantum on quantum physics theories. Mm-hmm. He was working in the realm of the theoretical and achieving results, possibly.
Possibly. It's yeah. So that's where we're at, really. Like, there's a lot of people that do subscribe to these more, how do you want to phrase it?
Supernatural, or
yes, more unbelievable aspects. And it's fascinating. There's so many videos. And we're going to have all of that in our sources, so people can go and browse through there and pick out the ones. Yeah, we'll group them all together. We'll lump them so you guys, it's easy to find.
Right.
Because we're going to have a lot of sources for this one. We kind of went down a few rabbit holes, and a lot of them weren't very helpful. It was fun, though. I'm so glad that we got to do this and cover one of my favorite topics, really. Like, Coral Castle to me it's kind of like a pet topic.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I have to go. Like, we have to go there. I want to get some photos of us sitting on some of those crazy
I thought
chairs.
You meant, like, we have to go. Like, we have to leave the recording.
Oh,
I was like, what?
Oh, yeah, we're done. See you later. No,
See ya.
I really want to go to Coral Castle.
Yes.
I really, really want to go to Coral Castle.
We got to do the whole Disney World and Coral Castle and whatever sort of crazy roadside attractions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it all. Apparently, according to Chris and Marie, it's the nutso facto state of the U.S.
Well, you know, and we've seen that watching one of our favorite shows, American Pickers.
American Pickers, they always run into awesome characters. Yeah,
they run into some real characters down there.
Always in Florida.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Actually,
place.
New Mexico's another hotspot, too.
Yeah.
That
For
guy.
just strange things.
Woo, shout out American Pickers.
Yeah.
Mike and Frank.
Yeah, Mike and Frank.
Frank Fritz. Oh, yeah. I love that guy. Anyways, so...
Okay, but so where are we at here? I mean,
Any conclusions from you? Any wrap-up? Final ideas?
Yeah, like...
Final thoughts. Play them out. Let's do it.
I guess the thing for me trying to wrap my head around what Ed could have achieved in building Coral Castle, you know, it makes me think of like the Easter Island heads. Makes me think about all these other things that were achieved, and they're in a different context.
Yeah.
So there's different theories as to how they were completed or achieved, right? But my question is whether or not each one of these individual contexts. So, for example, with the Easter Island heads, there's theories that they were rolled on log rollers, right? And then that they used up all their logs and there were no more trees on the island, and that's one of the reasons they couldn't, you know, they ran out of food and supplies and they all died off. That's a theory.
Yeah.
There's another theory because the legend goes that the Moai heads walked themselves to the ocean.
Yeah.
And that, similar to the tripod kind of thing that Ed was using that we still see today, like tripods are used for hoisting all kinds of things.
Well, yeah, I was just watching that video earlier about that. Yeah,
so sort of a similar idea to that, except instead of outright hoisting it, it was basically, you know, teams of three, a team on either side of the head and one on the back stabilizing it with a tripod and, you know, twisting it and walking these things that weighed 10 tons.
So they were literally twisting the tripod?
So the tripod's not quite touching the ground, and as they twist it, it's almost like it's walking.
It's sitting on.
Yes.
I see. I was picturing maybe like some sort of rope suspending the...
Well, it's attached to the actual rock head itself as well. But this is just like, it's just like leveraging physics. It's just like pull to one side and then pull to another side.
Kind of like what Chris was saying with the fridge.
Exactly. Exactly like that. But again, it's like, okay, in that instance, well, there's like over 1,000 of these things. Some of them are...
And what was the estimated population of this island?
I mean, it was small. It was a tiny population.
Yeah.
You know, they moved some of these things. There was some that hadn't been erected yet. There was one that weighed 200 metric tons. It just hadn't been completely cut out of the rock yet. It was only partially cut out. Did they intend to ever lift that? I don't know. But if they were, I don't know how simple physics with some trees and ropes is going to lift a 200-ton block. So it gets us halfway to finding out what actually happened.
Yeah.
And I buy into Chris and Marie, and I think 90% of it was simple physics. And the flywheel and some of the electromagnetic stuff was maybe just a distraction.
It's just a side project, maybe.
Could have been.
Just an old man puttering around his free time.
But at the end of the day, I think he did know something. I think he acquired some sort of knowledge. And I mean, there was the whole thing with the Agnes Scuffs, right? Agnes Scuffs was not a real person, supposedly.
You can take that in a lot of
translated
different ways.
to Innocent Kiss. Is that just a part of his riddles?
Very strange.
You know, he wrote these books and these
strange philosophy of a man.
Yes. You know, and then the records showed that he was intended to be married to another woman whose father was the leader of a paganist revival in Latvia.
George.
And, we got George visiting us here for the end of the recording. That's okay. He's famous
sorry.
now.
Georgie.
He's been on the social media. He's famous now, so it's all good.
Aw, cutie. Anyways, sorry.
I'm buying into the mysticism, though.
He's buying into it.
I'm buying into it.
I'm still on the fence. I can't decide. I'm firmly in the middle of the fence.
Come on, come on. You gotta pick something. Come on.
It always comes back to to Ed's feeble stature, his lifelong health issues, and just how exactly what you're saying, he is a very eccentric man. We don't know what motivates an eccentric man from Latvia like that. I don't know.
Right.
You don't know.
No.
Nobody
and you don't know what he
knows.
picked up along the way.
And that's just it. And he did spend a lot of time by himself.
Yeah.
And Chris, he commented on that too and just said, he basically created an entire world, a fantasy world that he was living in. But how much of that is reality and how much is fantasy? Because he did achieve something very remarkable.
But at the same time, it's you could say, the monks spend endless amounts of time in solitary confinement, you might say, meditating.
Yeah.
Perhaps Ed achieved some sort of similar meditation. I don't know if he was achieving it sitting on a piece of rock, but anyway.
So, I guess that pretty much wraps it up.
That pretty much wraps it up, indeed.
So we hope everyone enjoyed that. It was a special episode, and we're really excited because we actually have another exciting announcement. We're excited about our exciting announcement. Oh my god. Next week we are going to have another cool collaboration with our friends over at Double Density Podcast.
Super excited for that.
Woo! Yeah, we're actually going to do a bit of a mashup Canadian tour of weirdness.
Yeah.
So a whole bunch of stuff. You can count on some UFO stuff, some cryptic creatures, some haunting, some unexplained phenomena all over the map.
All kinds of goodies.
Yeah, we're really excited about that one. So other
Before we
than
wrap
that,
this up, we've got
I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in again and for the awesome feedback that we got on iTunes and Facebook this week. Special shout out to G. Gaspari and Josh. Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate that. And then I think you had a little bit.
I did indeed. I just wanted to give a shout out to Scott and Forrest from the Astonishing Legends podcast, as well as Chris Stapps from the Eastern Border, just because their episode really inspired this one, and we definitely used some tidbits from that.
They dug up some sweet stuff.
To push the research. So shout out to you guys. You have awesome shows. Make sure you go check them out. And thanks again so much for listening to this episode, you guys. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes.
And go interact on Twitter and Insta with us.
Yes, please.
We love that stuff.
Yeah, we want to interact with you guys more, so come chat with us.
Yeah.
All right, until next time, we'll see you next week.
Woo.